Hey guys, we are here tonight for the state exam and school exam review class. So we're basically going to go based off of this right here in front of us. This is the state exam outline, which we base our school exam off as well. So this is basically every single year the state puts out a state exam outline, and that state exam outline, kind of more or less just cover their outline at least, just mentions the topics that are on the test. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through all of these topics individually and with it fully filled out. So what I've basically done here is I've essentially turned about, I think, 5-6 pages into about 30 pages. So that's what we're going to be covering here tonight. So we're going over things. I'm going to highlight it like this, so you'll know what we're talking about at that point, and we'll go through all of this. So we got a lot to get through tonight. So we'll kind of get right into it. I'm going to hold on any questions till the end. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box, but just know that I'm not going to get to them until the end. So again, if you guys have questions as we go through these topics, just write them in the chat box and then we'll get towards them at the end. So one thing I want to point out to begin with, you'll see each section titled. So for instance, right here, where it says property ownership, salesperson 6 items, brokers 5 items, that's them telling you. This is not my opinion. This is what the state actually tells you. The state says that on the state exam, 6 of the 110 questions will come from this section here. And you'll see that as we go through this. Like for instance, this section, land use, controls and regulations, there's 5 items on the state exam. So again, I'll point that out as we get through these different sections here. So let's get started here, right at the top with classes of property. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is after we're done with the review, I'm going to post this on our Facebook page. I'm not going to leave it up past like probably 8 a.m. tomorrow though, because to be honest with you, I just don't want any other schools to have access to this. So I'll post it on our Facebook page as soon as we get done with this, so you guys can download it right away. But I'm going to delete the post by the morning, so just make sure you download it right away. All right, so getting into this, so starting off with classes of property. Let me just mute these phones real quick, otherwise they're going to be ringing the whole time. All right, so classes of property here. So real versus personal property. So for starters here, when determining what's real and what's personal property, the easiest way to determine that is simply ask yourself who works for who. Whoever works for somebody, excuse me, I'm talking about principal agent because I went over that today. Real versus personal properties, we just ask ourselves, can we move it or not? If we can easily move it, it's personal property. If we can't easily move it, it's part of the real property. So real property, we say, is immovable and automatically conveys with the sale. Personal property, we say, is movable, and that's automatically excluded. They could also ask you how these things are financed. So for real property, we would finance that through a mortgage. So when you buy a house, you finance that through a mortgage. If you were to finance personal property, you would do so through what's called either a security agreement or a chattel mortgage. So that term chattel, simply put, just means personal property. So if they say chattel mortgage, all they're saying is personal property mortgage. And then they could ask you how these things are transferred. So when you buy a home, what does the seller give to you? They give you a deed, right? So the seller is going to give you a deed. When you buy personal property, you get what's called a bill of sale. And we'll go through these, individually as well. So the bill of sale would transfer personal property, and the deed is going to transfer real property. Next here, you know what? Let me. We have a couple people saying, "Can you post this now?" I'm going to post this. If you guys want to download this, so you can take notes yourself. I'm going to post this attachment on our Facebook page right now. So let me just do that right now. So this way, if you guys want to take notes as we're going through this, I'm going to get this posted up now here. Facebook's just coming up slow, but this will be up in the next couple minutes here. Yeah, we're gonna skip that. I'll have to email this to you guys. I'm not doing it right now though, because I can't email, 100 people. We would never be able to even start this. So it won't let me post a Word doc on here. Um, so yeah, you guys are just gonna have to follow along here. All right, so let's get back to this. Let me pull this up again. All right, so let me pull my screen up. If anybody's asking questions, I'm not going to be looking at them until we're at least at our first break because I need to get through this. All right. So real versus personal property we just talked about. Next here, B, fixtures. So as far as fixtures are concerned, fixtures are part of the real property. So what are fixtures? Fixtures are attached to the real property in such a manner it would cause considerable damage if they were to be removed. Now that I think of it, I don't know why I even just said I was going to put the attachment up because you guys don't need to take notes. These are literally the notes. These are the notes I would have written on the board. So there's nothing to even take notes of. So anyway, there's no value. I'll send this to you, but there's really no value in you having it anyway. Again, you could have it for a copy, so I'll send it to you after. So fixtures, again, they're part of the real property. They're automatically going to convey. Examples: kitchen cabinets, ceiling fans, sinks, bathtubs, things like that. Now, getting into land here, so land is the Earth's surface, everything attached to it. So your land goes all the way up to the sky and down to the center core of the Earth. Your land up to the sky, we call that your air rights. The land down to the center core of the Earth, we call that your mineral rights. So above the surface, we call that your air rights. Below the surface, we call those your mineral rights. When you sell your property, you could sell those individually too. You could sell your air rights, you could sell your mineral rights, or like most people, you just sell them all together. Next here, 2B, economic characteristics here. So DUST, this acronym, demand, utility, scarcity, transferability. So in regards to this, property has to have all facets of all four of these to, really hold any value. There's got to be demand for it. Utility means it's got to be useful. Demand and scarcity go hand in hand, supply and demand. And transferability, is it capable of being transferred? If the property is capable of being transferred, excuse me, I should say if it's not capable of being transferred, then it would hold no value. The one that's not listed here, but I did list it, I wrote it in, separate, is location, which on the state exam in particular, they refer to a lot of times as this word situs. So situs is another word for location. So this is by far the number one determining factor of value. So if they ask you what's the number one determining factor of value, location, situs means the same thing. Next here, this meets and bounds description. So the term meets and bounds, meets means directions and angles, and bounds means the boundary lines of your property. The most important thing probably to know for this is that meets and bounds descriptions will always both start and also end at a set point of beginning. So if they ask you, like, where does a meets and bounds description both start and end? it would both start and end at what's called a set point of beginning. So if they say like set point of beginning or starting point, let me get here, sorry. If they say set point of beginning or starting point, that's in reference to a meets and bounds. Whenever you hear, point of beginning or starting point, that's a meets and bounds description. Other ways you can legally describe property, lot and block numbers, we have things like meets and bounds descriptions, things like that. We have street addresses. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can legally describe property. So getting into here, encumbrances. So an encumbrance is any claim, lien, charge, or liability against property. So there's a lot of different things that fall underneath encumbrance. So again, an encumbrance is any claim, any lien, any charge, or any liability against property. So if they were to ask you, which of the following would best describe, any claim, any lien, any charge, or any liability against property, that would, generally just fall underneath this term here, encumbrance. So an encumbrance, again, any claim, lien, charge, or liability against property. And then moving forward here, talking about, terms like liens, lien is an example of an encumbrance. So a lien is a right given by law to a creditor to basically have a debt or a charge satisfied out of your property. So simply put, I would say the key word that goes along with lien is creditor. So again, the key word that goes along with lien is a creditor. So anytime you have a lien, it means you owe somebody money. There's a creditor involved. And getting into these different types of liens here with 2 and 3, we have voluntary and involuntary liens. So a voluntary lien, I like to say, is one you raise your hand and ask for. So a type of lien that you would raise your hand and ask for, simply put, would be like a mortgage, right? So when I take out a loan to buy a home, nobody forces me to take out that loan. I take out that loan voluntarily. So you can have voluntary lien. Good example of that, again, would be like a mortgage lien. Involuntary liens, ones you don't raise your hand and ask for. So you don't pay your property taxes and they place a property tax lien on your home. You don't, for example, you don't pay a contractor who does work on your house. They can place what we call a construction or mechanics lien on your home. So an involuntary lien is a lien placed on your home that you don't want to have placed on your home. You didn't volunteer for it. Again, good examples, property tax liens and construction liens. Then we get into specific versus general liens here. So specific liens, they would attach to one property and one property only. General liens, they would attach to all properties. So good example of a specific lien is a property tax lien. If you don't pay your property tax on 123 Main Street, they place a specific lien against just 123 Main Street. The general lien, that would attach to and that would affect all properties. So a good example of a general lien, that would attach to and would affect all properties would be like a personal judgment. So if you have things like unpaid medical bills, that would be a good example of that. And then number 6 here, how are lien holders paid out? Lien holders are paid out based on the order of recording. So if they ask you how are lien holders paid out, they're paid out simply based on the order of recording. So for 6, again, priority of liens, lien holders are paid out based on the order of recording. That's number 6. So in other words, you could have 1,000 liens on your home. It doesn't matter how long you've owed the people money. What it comes down to is when did they record their lien. There's one lien, though, that'll jump all of them in order of recording, and that's property tax liens. The day you don't pay your property tax liens, that's going to take precedence over all liens. All right, so now we get into easements here. So as far as easements are concerned, an easement is the right that one property owner has in the land of another. So a good example of an easement is John Smith wants to cross Jane Doe's property to get up to the beach. And John says to Jane, hey, can you grant me an easement to cross your property? If Jane says yes and she grants that easement, she is what we would call the servient premise. The servient premise is the party being burdened by the easement. The dominant premise would be John. John is going to benefit from this because now he can cross over somebody else's property. He has the right to do so. So in an easement, you have one party who benefits from it, one who's burdened from it. The one who benefits from it, we call the dominant premise. The one who's burdened by it is called the servient premise. Now, after the servient premise grants this easement, the only party that can get rid of it is just the dominant premise. And only the dominant premise can get rid of the easement. And that's why nobody really grants these realistically. Because the biggest issue is that easements, as you'll see right here, they're said to be appurtenances. What an appurtenance means is that it runs with the land or continues with the land. So easements are said to be appurtenances, meaning that they would run with the land or they would continue with the land. And the issue there is that if you granted the easement, Jane gives it to, John, thinking she gave it to John, but she didn't give it to John, she gave it to John's property. So if John sells to the worst neighbor of all time, well, now the worst neighbor of all time has that same thing. So again, a easement runs with the land. It's not given to a person, it's given to the property. If you instead wanted to give a person the right to cross your property, get to the beach, you would give them what's called a license. Because when you grant a license, giving a license is granting personal and non-assignable permission to do something. That's really the difference there. If we go to the top here, this is the most common type of easement, an easement in gross. So an easement in gross, good example of that is a general utility easement. So again, an easement in gross, a good example of that's utility easement. So what do I mean when I say utility easement? Think about telephone poles, gas lines, sewer pipes, things like that. An easement in gross, again, a good example of that would just, in general, simply put, that would just be a utility easement, a government easement. So the unique thing about that, there's only a servient and there's no dominant premise. Talked about the license here already. Then we have an encroachment here. So an encroachment is when a piece of your neighbor's property crosses your property line. So if they were to ask you, what would it be called when a piece of a neighbor's property crosses your property line? That's called an encroachment. How would you find an encroachment? What would you order? You'd have a survey done, right? You'd have a survey done to find out if there is any encroachments. Then getting into here, types of different estates. The first one mentioned is a freehold estate. So if you have a freehold estate, we say that's kind of like saying you're free to do whatever you want with the property while you have it. Again, these are estates that last for at least an indefinite period of time, at least as long as somebody's lifetime. The one that lasts for somebody's lifetime is called a life estate, which we'll talk about in a second. The highest degree of ownership, which we'll also talk about, is called fee simple. Now, not mentioned here, but it will be mentioned later here, is what's called non-freehold estates. Non-freehold estates is when you're not free to do whatever you want with the property. Non-freehold and leasehold, they mean the same thing. So again, non-freehold and leasehold, they mean the same exact thing. So next here, number 2, the qualified fee estate. If you grant somebody a qualified fee estate, you're granting somebody personal and non-assignable permission to do something. Excuse me, that's a license. Let me get back to this. Qualified fee estate is granting somebody a property under a specific qualification. So what do I mean by that? If I give you a property and say you must keep this painted red forever, I'm giving you a qualified fee estate. If you paint it white, I'm allowed to come back in and take this property here. So again, a qualified fee estate is granting an estate that lasts for at least, as long as you don't do something, I guess is the best way to put it. So again, you're granting a property under a specific qualification. So I put a deed restriction in that says you must keep this house painted red. I've given you a qualified fee estate. Life estate, the dead giveaway here is that it's measured off of somebody's life. So for this life estate, it's going to be measured off of somebody's life. So if I give you property and say you can do whatever you want with this property while you're alive, but once you die, it comes back to me, I've given you a life estate. So again, when you grant a life estate, you're granting somebody an interest in property measured off the life or the lives of one or more natural persons. So again, a life estate is an estate in land that is limited to the life of a natural person. It also mentions here specifically this life estate per attribute. That would be if I grant you a life estate measured off the life of Joe. So if I grant you a life estate measured off the life of Joe, in other words, a third party, I'm granting you what we call life estate per attribute in that case. And leasehold estates, these are just leases. Again, another word for this is to say non-freehold. Non-freehold and leasehold, they mean the same thing. All right, so getting into forms of ownership here, ownership and severalty, simply put, that's one person only. So if one person's name appears in the deed to the exclusion of all others, we call that ownership and severalty. So again, ownership and severalty is ownership by one person and one person only. And then we have concurrent ownership, which is ownership by 2 or more people. And the 2 main examples of this is tenancy in common and joint tenancy. The number one thing to know about the 2 is I would say in reference to joint tenancy. And joint tenancy has this thing called the right of survivorship, which you'll see listed here. And what the right of survivorship means is that if you have 3 joint tenants and one of them dies, the second that they die, their ownership interest goes to the surviving joint tenants. They can't pass it on to their family. Instead, it automatically goes to the surviving joint tenants. They cannot pass it on to their family, or heirs, or anybody for that matter. It just automatically goes to the surviving joint tenants. That's number one. Number two for joint tenancy is the part that we just said you can't devise your interest to your heirs. Why? Due to the right of survivorship. Number three in a joint tenancy, you got to have equal ownership. So that here. So in joint tenancy, you got to have equal ownership. That's absolutely required. So if you have 4 people, it's got to be 25% apiece. You got 3, 33% apiece, so on and so forth. Number 4, a corporation cannot be a joint tenant. Why? Due to their perpetual existence. If you had 3 people involved in a joint tenancy and the 4th was a corporation, the corporation is always going to be the survivor at the end. So you couldn't have a corporation involved in a joint tenancy due to what we call their perpetual existence. They would always outlive the natural person. Now I always tell everybody, whatever's true for joint tenancy, just keep in mind is the exact opposite for tenancy in common. So if you just remember one, you can know that the exact opposite is going to be true for the other. So for test purposes, I recommend just trying to remember one and remember the exact opposite is true for the other. Tenancy by entirety, another form of concurrent ownership. This is the same thing as joint tenancy, but just between a husband and wife. So in New Jersey, when a husband and wife take title, it's automatically tenancy by entirety, unless specifically noted otherwise. So that's the tenancy by entirety. So let's move on here and go to page 3. All right, so page 3 here, a lease. So as far as a lease is concerned, when you have a lease, it's a type of contract. And what happens in this contract? Well, the landlord gives up the right to use the property. In exchange, the tenant pays them rent or consideration. Really that simple. Now, these different types of leases here, the first one mentioned in the estate is the estate for years. An estate for years is a lease for a definite period of time. In other words, any lease that has a definite start date and a definite end date, we would call it an example of an estate for years. This could be a lease for a week. This could be a lease for a month. It could be a lease for 2 years, 3 years. Any lease that has a definite start date and definite end date is called an estate for years. Then we have the periodic tenancy. The periodic tenancy is any lease from period to period. This could be week to week, month to month, year to year. The two that we have to know about are really the month to month and year to year, and specifically this right here, the notices of termination. So if you sign a month to month periodic tenancy, hypothetically, that lease will go on forever until landlord or tenant gives 30 days notice to cancel. In a year to year, it's 90 days notice. So if I sign a year to year lease today, that will hypothetically go on forever until landlord or tenant gives 90 days notice to cancel. So it's important to know those days of notice of cancellation. Number 4 here, the tenancy at will. That is a unique type of lease. Unique in the sense that these don't really happen. So a tenancy at will would be like this. I guess you could say it happens sometimes, but my brother gets divorced. He needs somewhere to live. I have a little apartment above my garage, and I tell him, go ahead, live above the garage. Just give me $500 a month. We don't need to sign anything. You're my brother. I trust you. That's what we call a tenancy at will, where the tenant lives in the property just willingly on behalf of the landlord. There's no written agreement. It's an informal arrangement, things like that. Probably the most important thing to know about this tenancy at will is that under the tenancy at will, the tenant is their lease isn't going to be respected. I guess that's the best way to put it. This is the only type of lease that's not binding on the new owner of property. So if I buy a property, there's currently a tenant at will in place. The day I close, I can tell them to leave. Why? Because it's really an informal arrangement. So this is really the only type of lease that's not binding on the new owner. Then we have a tenancy at sufferance. A tenancy at sufferance is created when a landlord suffers, when you have a holdover tenant. So if your tenant was supposed to move out on May 1st, they don't move out on May 1st, and you were supposed to have somebody else move in there, you have a tenancy at sufferance. They're a holdover tenant. How do you get them out of there now? You get them out of there through this thing called the actual eviction process, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But actual eviction is basically the process of removing a tenant. You got to serve them with a notice to please leave, called the notice to quit, then take them to court, get a judgment of possession, and if they still don't leave, file for a warrant for removal, to have a warrant to forcibly remove them at that point in time. So that would be the process of trying to evict somebody. we'll talk about that later. Ground lease here. So a ground lease is a lease for a very long period of time, 50, 75, 100 years. What's unique about this is not only is it super long, but the tenant is allowed to make any improvements or additions they would like to, but the tenant is allowed to, but in this case, any improvements they do make, they belong to the landlord at conclusion of term. So again, in a ground lease, the tenant is allowed to make any improvements or additions they want to. Unfortunately, any improvements or additions they do make would belong to the landlord once that term comes to an end. And in this ground lease, you find two clauses very, very commonly: the graduated lease and the step-up lease. So in the graduated lease, this here, in this circumstance, under a ground lease, you need to find ways to make rent go up. A graduated lease is one form of that. The graduated lease, the rent's going to be tied to an index, which could cause rent to go up or down. This is very common. The rent will be tied to maybe the consumer price index, and based on where the consumer price index goes, the rent will reflect that, whether it be monthly, annually, quarterly, so on and so forth. The difference between the step-up is the step-up calls for predetermined rent increases and increases only. Graduated could hypothetically go down if the consumer price index goes down, something like that, right? The step-up lease basically says your rent's going to go up by, I don't know, let's say 5% every single year, as an example. So the difference between the two is step-up calls for predetermined rent increases only. The graduated, rent is tied to an index, which could cause rent to go up or down. And then next here for commercial leases, we talk about, these three here: the net lease, gross lease, and percentage lease. So the net lease in real life, sometimes you hear referred to as a triple net lease. And the way a net lease works is that the tenant's not only paying rent, but they're paying all of the operating expense of the building. The tenant's paying rent, maintenance, utilities, taxes, landscaping, snow removal, so on and so forth. So again, under a net lease, the tenant is paying everything except for the owner's mortgage. Very commonly they ask, what does a tenant not pay under a net lease? The tenant does not pay the owner's mortgage. Under a gross lease, the tenant pays basically just one flat amount, and then the landlord pays for everything else. So under a gross lease, the tenant pays one flat amount, and the landlord at that point in time pays for everything else. So as an example, we rent our space here under a gross lease. We pay one flat amount of rent every single month. We don't have to worry about any other expenses. So if there was other expenses for, electric, heating, cooling, landscaping, snow removal, things like that, we don't worry about that, because under a gross lease, you just pay one flat amount. And then 12 talks about a percentage lease. So regarding a percentage lease, how does this work? Well, the key, I guess, word or situation you would see for this is shopping mall. So under a percentage lease, the tenant is paying not only rent, but they're paying a percentage of their gross sales to the landlord. So again, under a percentage lease, the tenant is not only paying rent, but they're paying a percentage of their gross sales to the landlord. And where would you typically find this? You would typically find this in a shopping mall. And in this percentage lease, the landlord wants to make sure they're making enough money. So they have this clause in here, let me just highlight this, called the recapture clause. And the recapture clause says that Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, if you don't do a set monthly minimum in sales, we're allowed to take the property back at that point in time. And they would be able to do so through what we call the recapture clause. So that is the recapture clause here. And then we have this bundle of rights theory. So the bundle of rights theory is basically a theory of ownership, and it says since the seller can't actually transfer you the house at closing, like they can't bring the actual house to closing, instead what they transfer is they simply transfer the bundle of rights, which is just all the rights of the company property ownership. So if they just ask you, like, which of the following would best describe all the rights of the company property ownership, that's called the bundle of rights. And bottom left here of page 3, physical description of property, monuments and benchmarks. So as far as monuments are concerned, these here are physically identifiable, land locations. So these are found on surveys typically. So this could be like a tree, a boulder, a street sign, a telephone pole. They could be natural or man-made. So monuments, they identify physical locations of property. And then benchmarks, what they do is they measure elevation. So benchmarks, again, they're not like posted on a wall and says, here's 4 feet. They measure elevation. So if the property slopes down over the course of like, from back to front by 4 feet, it would note that. All right, so let's go to page 4. Got to send a text to a client. All right. Next here, land use controls and regulations. So government rights and land, starting with property taxes here. So property taxes, number one, what do they pay for? They pay for the majority of local services. So if they ask you like, what would pay for the majority of local services? That's property taxes. And if you don't pay your property tax bill, we talked about that earlier, it's the first priority lien. Property tax liens, they would take precedence over all liens. So you could have, again, 1,000 liens on your home. The second that you don't pay your property taxes, that would take precedence over all liens at that point in time. Also, property taxes, what do they fund? They fund the majority of local services. So the majority of local services in a town, they're financed through property taxes. And then a special type of tax called a special assessment tax. These are levied against, the key phrase here, let's see, is benefiting property owners. So again, special assessment taxes are levied against benefiting property owners for things like street improvements or road repairs. So a lot of times in real life, you see special assessment fees in condo communities to pay for like a new capital thing they want to do, like new roofs and stuff like that. But for special assessment taxes, look out for the phrase benefiting property owners. And again, good examples are like sidewalks, curbs, things like that. Next here, we have eminent domain and condemnation. So eminent domain is the government's right to take private property for the public use with just compensation paid. Condemnation is their act of doing so. So they're really the same thing, except one is the right and one is the act. Eminent domain is their right to do so. Condemnation is their action of doing so. And then we have a escheat here. So another governmental power. If you die without a will and without heirs, you have died in a escheat. So a escheat is when you die without a will and you die without heirs. Then the property goes to the government, and we call that a escheat. These here, eminent domain, condemnation, and escheat, these are all examples of police power. So police power, simply put, is any public or any governmental restriction on the owner's use of property. So the most broad term to describe any public or any governmental restriction on the owner's use of property, that seems to be police power here. And then we get into zoning. So zoning is a legal tool for municipalities to control the use of land. So simply put, what does that mean? Well, they set up zones and say, in this zone, we can only have residential. In this zone, we could have commercial. In this zone, we could have agricultural, so on and so forth. So zoning, again, it's a legal tool for municipalities to control the use of real estate, as an example. So it just tells you what you can and cannot have in certain areas. And then talks about the master plan here. So as far as the master plan is concerned, the master plan is basically a blueprint. The keyword is blueprint there. It's a blueprint for the development of lands in a town. So the master plan just basically tells you, what you can and cannot do, kind of goes right in conjunction with zoning because the Planning and Zoning Board makes it. It's a blueprint for telling you what you can and cannot do. All right, so let's go to the next page here, talk about building codes. All right, so building codes, what do? They set minimum construction standards for buildings in the state. So if they ask you like, what would set minimum construction standards for buildings in the state, that's building codes. So again, here, building codes, what they do, they set minimum construction standards for buildings in the state. This environmental impact statement here, you're required to get this done before breaking ground on new construction. So if they ask you what must be done before breaking ground on new construction, it's this environmental impact statement. Now, when you do the environmental impact statement, what you're basically doing is you're trying to figure out what is the proposed, what will be the impact of this proposed project on the area. And that, again, we call the environmental impact statement. So they test not only like air quality, soil quality, water quality, but also what will the impact be on the schools, the streets, the water supply, the sewers, things like that. They take a lot into consideration there. This whole section here that I'm highlighting really all just comes down to this, the super fund. So the super fund, this is a fund that's in place to pay for hazardous waste cleanups. So if they ask you like what fund is in place to pay for hazardous waste cleanups, it's called the super fund. So again, the super fund, what that is, it's in place to pay for hazardous waste cleanups. So if you have like a hazardous waste site on your property, there's contamination, and you just don't have the money to clean it up, you're not willing to clean it up, the government says, well, listen, we're going to clean it up for you, but we're going to charge you. Because when they pay out of the super fund, they place this thing called a super lien on your home. And this super lien would take precedence over all liens except for a property tax lien. Deed restrictions, those are the opposite of police powers. Deed restrictions, those are private limitations on the owner's use of property. So again, deed restrictions, simply put, those are private limitations on the owner's use of property. If you have a deed restriction, it creates a certain type of ownership called a qualified fee estate. A qualified fee estate is granting somebody ownership that could end on the happening of a certain event. That certain event being usually if you violate the deed restriction. And then for B here, the CCRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, these are examples of things that you would find in the bylaws. You know, really bylaws, CCRs mean the same thing. They're forms of deed restrictions. So you would find these in like condos and townhome communities. They just tell you what you can and cannot do in there. Can you decorate around the holidays? Can you change your siding? Can you paint your exterior? Can you do your own roof? Can you do your own landscaping? So there's a lot of different things that come into play with that. So anyway, let's go HOA. I wouldn't worry so much about. And then here, valuation and market analysis. So let's get into this here. So valuation, I'm sorry, I just keep having this client text me. We're trying to arrange a showing right now. I know that sounds crazy, but we're trying to get somebody in this house. All right. So next here, value. So market value versus market price. So market value, we say, is what a home is worth based off the ready, willing, and able concept. And market price, we say, is simply what a home sells for. So market value, again, based off this ready, willing, and able concept. So market value, we say, is what a home is worth. Market price, simply what it sells for. Usually, they're almost identical. You might have extenuating circumstances where they could differ, but really, almost always, they're pretty much identical. We talked about these already, the characteristics of value, in particular situs here, which was important. Principles of value here, number 3, the principle of substitution. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but this principle of substitution, what this basically is, it's a principle of value that states the cost to acquire one property generally shouldn't exceed the cost to acquire a similar property of equal desirability. So this is the principle of value that we use with the sales comparison approach. So when we get to the sales comparison approach, we'll talk about this again. Number 4, the principle of highest and best use. What use of property is going to generate you the greatest net return over a given period of time? We call that the principle of highest and best use. So again, that's the use that's going to generate you the greatest net return over a given period of time. And then 6 here, the principle of contribution. So what does a principle of contribution state? The principle of contribution, what that states is that improvements to real estate, they're only worth, what they add to the value. So if I spend 50 grand on a kitchen renovation, it might only add 30,000 in value to the home. So what you spend on a renovation doesn't mean it's going to add that much in value to your home. And that's more or less what the principle of contribution states. Principle of conformity, what that states, that basically says when you have property that is similar, so let's say we have a townhouse community and all the units are identical, you're not going to see much of a variation in value, very low volatility as far as values are concerned. They're pretty much going to be stable. They're really just going to, trend around the same number. So conformity, we say, tends to stabilize values. And the number 10 here talks about plottage. Plottage is the increase in value due to what we call assemblage. So assemblage is the bringing together of 2 or more properties to form one. the increase in value due to assemblage, we call that plottage. Again, plottage is the increase in value due to assemblage. All right, so let's go to here. So the sales comparison approach, again, as you see here, this is based on that principle of substitution that we just talked about. When you're doing an appraisal and use the sales comparison approach, what you're basically doing is you're trying to figure out, I know this house, house A, just sold for 500 grand. House B that I'm going to is pretty much identical. What's this house worth? Well, probably about 500 grand. Why? We can compare the two. So with the sales comparison approach, we use this thing called the principle of substitution. What the principle of substitution states simply is the cost to acquire one property generally won't exceed the cost to acquire a similar property of equal desirability. So that's the principle of value that we would use with that. Then we have the cost approach. We would use this when we don't have a lot of comps for something. Things like churches, schools, libraries, public buildings, brand new homes. Why? We can't compare it with anything. So we have to find another way to come up with value, and the best way you can do that is the cost approach. And then the income approach, this would be used with income producing properties. The whole purpose of the income approach is to figure out, how much income does the property generate, and how do we turn that into a valuation? So the whole purpose of the income approach is to try to convert income into value. All right. Next here, number 3, depreciation. Depreciation is basically, they're probably going to ask you about time frames here. Number 1, they'll ask you, what can you depreciate? You can depreciate the improved or the building value of income producing properties. So if they ask you what can you depreciate, you can depreciate the improved or the building value of income producing properties. If it's a residential property, you can do so over 27.5 years. If it's a commercial property, you can do so over 39 years. That's if you were lazy and just doing it on a straight line basis. Then we have functional versus external obsolescence. So functional obsolescence is the loss in value due to the outdated nature of your home. So this would include things like poor floor plan, a bad layout, small closets, no closets, 8 bedrooms, only 1 bathroom, just the general outdated style of my home. We would call that functional obsolescence. This wouldn't include normal wear and tear like physical deterioration. And then we have external obsolescence, and external obsolescence is the loss in value due to anything outside of your property boundaries. So you live next to an airport, you live next to a train station, or not, I shouldn't say a train station, that might be valuable. Your house backs up the train tracks, you live right on a highway on a busy street. These could be examples of external obsolescence, loss in value due to what's outside of your property boundaries. This part up here, next page, gross rent multiplier here. If they ask you about this, what you're basically just doing is you're taking your sales price divided by your gross rent. So in this example here, it says your sales price was 500 grand, your gross rent was 50,000. What's your GRM? 10. You just take the sales price divided by the gross rent. All right, so financing here. So as far as financing is concerned, what are some terms you have to know? Number 1, LTV. LTV is loan to value. That is as simple as it sounds, loan to value. You take your loan amount divided by the value. So if the loan was 400 grand and I was buying it for 500, I would do 400 divided by 500 would give me 80%. So loan to value ratio, again, is your loan in relation to the value of the home. Points, which is a charge, that you get charged depending upon, who you are, I shouldn't say who you are, I should say more so what your credit profile is. Do you have a good credit score, bad credit score, what's your down payment, things like that. Those could all be grounds for why the lender might want to charge you points. So every point that you're charged is 1% of the loan amount, not the sales price, but 1% of the loan amount. That's number 1. Number 2, the lender's yield increases 1/8 of a percentage for every point they charge you. So their yield, their return, goes up by 1/8 of a percentage every point they charge you. So again, points, really the main thing is to know this first part here. They're 1% of the loan amount. And then getting into the types of loans here. So as far as the types of loans are concerned, we have a term or a straight loan. So a term or a straight loan is an interest-only loan. So again, a term or a straight loan is an interest-only loan. You're only paying principal. You're not touching the, you're only paying interest. You're not touching the principal. So that we call a term or a straight loan. Then we have an amortized loan. So an amortized loan, that's a gradual paying down of both principal and interest, leaving you a balance of zero at the end. Most loans are amortized, where over the course of 30 years, you pay principal and interest, and after 30 years, you're done at that point in time. And then we have a partially amortized loan. So partially amortized loans are loans that leave a balance at the end. So any loan that leaves a balance at the end would be a good example of a partially amortized loan. So what are some examples of that? The interest-only loan we talked about, that's one example. Another example is a balloon mortgage. So if I take out a loan for 500 grand on a 30-year amortization schedule, but a 10-year term, that means the loan term is 10 years, but I'm paying it back as if I borrowed the money for 30. So after 10 years, I'm going to have a big lump sum payment due, called a balloon payment. Then we have an ARM here, an adjustable rate mortgage. So the way that works is they'll classify it as like a 7/1 ARM. And that would mean for the first 7 years, it's a fixed rate of interest. After that, you hit an adjustment period, at which time your rate's going to adjust based off the index it's tied to. Could cause rent to go up, could cause rent to go down. So that is an ARM in that case. Now, in this ARM, they have rate caps and payment caps, which say your interest rate will never go above this much, your monthly payment will never go above that much. But if the rate cap or payment cap is exceeded, money doesn't necessarily disappear. What just occurs instead is what we call negative amortization. And then number 4 here, conventional versus insured loans. The main thing to note there is that conventional loans, those are a two-party transaction. You just have lender and borrower. With an insured loan, three-party transaction, you have lender, borrower, and insurance company. And then here we have reverse mortgages. So as far as reverse mortgages are concerned, the unique thing about this, they might say, what's the only type of mortgage where the homeowner gets paid? It's a reverse mortgage. So in a reverse mortgage, only type of mortgage where the homeowner gets paid. Got to be a certain age too. You got to be 62 plus to qualify. Let's skip down to this source of loan money, seller owner financing. They'll typically on the test call seller owner financing a purchase money mortgage. Technically speaking, a purchase money mortgage is any type of mortgage. But with that being said, usually when they make reference to it, it's in reference to seller owner financing. So again, seller owner financing, that is referred to as a purchase money mortgage. And then we have FHA versus VA loans. So the FHA, a lot of people think the FHA lends money. That's a misconception. I always tell people, when you hear the FHA, think of an insurance company. Why? The FHA, what they do is they insure loans. So again, what the FHA does is they insure loans. Simply put, the FHA, they insure loans. They do not lend money. Who lends money on FHA loans? The answer is qualified lending institutions. So that's just a fancy word for banks. So qualified lending institutions, they provide the financing on FHA loans. And FHA loans, again, if you're going to use one to buy a home, you do have to put some money down. You could go as low as like 3.5%. And realistically, I can get you, and you'll learn how to do this, but I can get you to buy a home through FHA with zero money down, but we don't have to get into that now. And last but not least, for the FHA, it does have to be owner occupied. You can only use it for owner occupied housing. Whether that happens or we don't need to get into it. Whether that happens or not is another story. So anyway, VA loans here. As far as VA loans are concerned, who qualifies for these? These are Veterans Administration loans, so veterans qualify for these. Much like the FHA loan, they are insured, but the term they just use is guaranteed, which really means the same thing. So VA loans are guaranteed. The most unique thing they ask about it, though, is the down payment. Under the VA, requires 0% down. The VA, simply put, would require 0% down. And also, VA loans are capable of being assumed by anybody, both veterans and non-veterans. So again, both veterans and non-veterans, they can assume VA loans. So again, probably the most unique thing is the 0% down part. So again, more on mortgages here. The assumption of a mortgage, right? So when you assume a loan, what you're basically doing is, let's say, for example, the seller wants to sell for 500 and they have a loan on the property for 400. If you're going to assume that loan, the first step is, as the buyer, you pay the seller the equity in the property, which is 100 grand in that case. If it's worth 500, they owe 400, they have 100 grand in equity. You pay the seller the 100 grand in equity in the home, and then you take over the loan payments. So in this case, I take over these loan payments. I pay it as if I was them. That's how an assumption works. The buyer pays the seller the equity in the property, then takes over their loan payments. And on top of that, with the assumption, the buyer signs a promissory note, making them primarily liable for the payment of debt. So that's a big thing too. They would sign that promissory note. And then we have the due on sale or alienation clause. Now, due on sale and alienation means the same thing. Due on sale means due on the sale of your home, you must do what? Well, due on the sale of your home, you must pay off your loan in full. So when you sell your home, you must pay off your loan in full. The term alienation is just used to describe any time you convey or transfer property. So alienation clause, what the term alienate means is to convey or transfer property. So the alienation clause states that when you do convey or transfer property, you must pay off your entire loan balance in full. Then number 3 here, the acceleration clause. So what the acceleration clause states is that upon the happening of a certain event, the lender can call the entire balance due. Now, the happening of this certain event typically is default in payment. So once there's default in payment, the lender can call the entire balance due. So that's kind of like the first step in the foreclosure. And number 4 here, prepayment. Just really note there's no prepayment penalties for residential loans in New Jersey. They can charge prepayment penalties on commercial loans, and I just don't think they're going to ask about that. And 5, release. When is the lender's interest released from your property? Well, once you've paid off in full, right? Once you pay off the loan in full, the lender's interest is then released from the property at that point in time. And they would give you a satisfaction piece to recognize this. So the satisfaction piece here is what the lender gives the borrower once they've paid off their loan in full, that satisfaction piece. Next here, New Jersey is what we call a lien theory state. When you take out a loan to buy a home in New Jersey, the bank is going to place a lien on your home. They don't take your deed. Some other states, I don't know which states, but some other states are what we call title theory states. And in these states, the bank actually holds on to your deed until you pay them back the entire amount that they've lent to you. New Jersey is not one of those states, though. All right, so we know mortgage. Deed of trust is an alternative to a mortgage. Deed of trust is a form of seller financing. And the way that this works here is that, let's say a seller's home is listed for $700. A buyer comes in and says, listen, I'll give you your full asking price. I'll put $300,000 up front, but I need you to carry a note for me for $400. As a seller, I say, why? Why can't you just get a loan? This buyer says, I had a foreclosure last year. The seller says, well, do I look like an idiot? Why do I want to hold a note for you? Well, here's how we'll handle it. You hold the $400,000 note. I'll pay it back to you over the next 15 years at 5% interest, and you don't give the deed to me. You give the deed to a neutral third-party trustee who's going to hold on to it in trust. So in the case of foreclosure, in the case that I stop paying you, all you got to do is reach out to the trustee, let them know that I stopped paying you. They are then going to reach out to me. If I can't prove otherwise, you get the deed back free and clear of going through, kind of the whole prolonged foreclosure process. You get to keep my money. How's that sound? Well, it sounds too good to be true. Well, it's not too good to be true. It just rarely happens, because if it does happen, the purchaser is taking on a huge risk. All right, so moving on here, this Equal Credit Opportunity Act basically just tells you that you cannot discriminate when lending money. As a lender, you cannot discriminate. I think that's pretty straightforward. One form of discriminatory advertising is this bolded term here, redlining. Redlining is a discriminatory lending practice where lenders basically refuse to approve loans, or they approve far fewer loans in areas where there's a lot of minorities. We call that redlining. So how would you mitigate against redlining and prevent redlining? Well, this act here, called the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. So the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, that requires lenders to fully disclose all loans that they approve and deny, with the whole purpose being that we want to prevent redlining. Next here, 7A talks about usury. Usury is an illegal interest. So in other words, interest that's in excess of legally allowable limits. So usury is an illegal interest. Then we get into laws of agency here. So first and foremost, talking about principals and agents. A agent, we like to say, if you're trying to determine who's the principal and who's the agent, ask yourself who works for who. Whoever works for somebody is the agent. Whoever's being represented is the principal. Now, different types of agents here. A special agent, they're probably going to ask you, like, what's the best description? What's the best example? The best description is somebody who has limited authority. The best example would be a real estate broker. And then general agent here, same deal. What's the best description? What's the best example? The best description is somebody has broad authority, and the best example would be a property manager. So a property manager, they're not just like mowing lawns; they're physically maintaining the property, dealing with client relations, tenant relations, things like that. Then 3 here we have a subagent. A subagent is an agent for an agent. So the best example of that is the listing salesperson, a listing agreement. In the listing agreement, the technically the agent on every piece of business that you do is your brokerage firm. So as the salesperson, you are an agent for an agent. In other words, you're a subagent. You're an agent as a salesperson. You're an agent for the agency. You're a subagent. And then buyer's agents here. Buyer's agents, simply put, they represent the buyer. Seller's agents represent the seller. Dual agents represent both buyer and seller. So if you're a dual agent, you represent both the buyer and the seller. If you're going to be a dual agent, represent both buyer and seller, you have to let both parties know about that. You must be a disclosed dual agent. Referral agent, there's only one thing that they can do, just refer clients to their broker. Don't worry about that because they're taking that. They've actually taken that out already. They had to redo it for some kind of legality purpose. So next here, fiduciary responsibility. So as far as being a fiduciary is concerned, when you're operating a fiduciary capacity, you're operating a position of trust to represent your client's best interest. So the term that goes along with fiduciary is position of trust. So if they ask you what would best describe the position of trust, representing a client in, it's called a fiduciary capacity in that case. Let's see, creation of agency relationships. So it goes over a couple up here. The broker salesperson agreement. So in reference to the broker salesperson agreement, what is that evidenced by? It's evidenced by the employment agreement. Now, if we determine who's the principal and who's the agent here, all we got to do is ask ourselves who works for who. Does the broker work for the salesperson or salesperson work for the broker? Well, the salesperson works for the broker. So here the salesperson's the agent and the broker's the principal. And again, this is evidenced by an employment agreement. In this employment agreement, you're going to have 2 main things. Number 1, the rate of compensation. In other words, your commission split. And number 2, a promise the broker is going to pay all commissions due within 10 business days of receiving the funds. So again, in this here, in the employment agreement, you're going to find, number 1, the rate of compensation, in other words, the commission split. And number 2, a promise the broker is going to pay all commissions due within 10 business days of receiving the funds. The key word really is receiving the funds. Then in the broker-client agreement, this would be, with the client-broker arrangement, you work with the seller, it's called a listing agreement. You work with the buyer exclusively, it's called the buyer's agency agreement. We'll talk about that in a little. Then express versus implied contracts. The only one to really note is express, just means in writing. All express means is in writing. Next here, the consumer information statement, in other words, the CIS. That is a document that you must give to a client before discussing their financial ability to buy or sell or their motivation for doing so. So before you discuss somebody's financial ability to buy or sell or their motivation for doing so, got to give them a copy of the CIS. This CIS here is basically a document that just discloses, the various ways in which you could represent them. Talked about dual agency already. Agents buying, if you're representing yourself and buying a home, you just have to write that in the sales contract. That's all. So traditional common law agency duties. What's that a fancy word for? Your fiduciary, relationships, right? So when you're operating as a fiduciary, you are operating in a position of trust to represent your client's best interest. So again, a fiduciary capacity is a position of trust to represent your client's best interests. Like confidentiality and loyalty, these two go hand in hand. Be loyal to your client's interests, keep their information confidential. Duty of obedience, obey your client's orders. Duty to account, accounting for any time money changes hands. And the thing to know about that is if a client gives you a deposit check, all clients' monies must be deposited within 5 business days. So if they ask you, how soon must a client's money be deposited? All clients' money has got to be deposited within 5 business days. Duty of disclosure, just disclosing pertinent facts to your client. Talks about the fiduciary part. Effects of a dual agent on an agent's duties. So if you're in the day class, we went over this today. If you are a dual agent, means you're representing both buyer and seller. If you're representing both the buyer and the seller, you can't negotiate for one party over the other. You have to play that neutral, kind of third party. You're playing telephone, basically. You're delivering whatever message one party wants you to deliver to the other. You really serve no value, unfortunately. And then next here, termination of agency. These are some examples. Expiration, completion, performance of objective, things like that. So regarding this here, all of these different ways, expiration, I take a 6-month listing, 6 months is up, expiration. Completion, performance of objective. My objective was when I listed your home to sell it. So we completed our objective. We've sold it. That's B. Government comes in and condemns the house. Well, I can't have it listed anymore because now the government owns it. Destruction of property. If the house burns down, I can't still have it listed. Death of principal or the agent. Death of the principal or agent will cancel listings and offers, but not necessarily sales contracts. And termination of acts of parties. Give some examples here. Revocation by principal. Revocation is another word for withdraw. So revocation by principal simply means withdraw. Renunciation by the agent means when your agent renunciates a listing. In other words, the agent says, I just want to let this thing go. That's renunciation by the agent there in that case. And then next here, it talks about mandated disclosure. So the property condition disclosure. So this seller's disclosure form, despite it being under the mandated disclosures part, it's not required. So you don't have to. It's not required by law that a seller fill it out. I think you should have them fill it out, but it's not required by law. If the seller does opt to fill it out, they must fill it out by themselves. We can't fill it out for them. We can't even read them the questions and then fill in their answers. They have to solely and 100% fill it out by themselves. Then different types of deeds here. The first one listed is the warranty deed, sometimes called the general warranty deed. The warranty deed, the way that this works, and if you're in the day class, this is what we would have went over this afternoon, but we're going to go over Friday afternoon instead. The general warranty deed, the grantor says to the grantee, I'm promising you this deed is free and clear of defects back to forever, which on one hand provides the grantee with the highest protection, the grantee being the purchaser. But on the other end, it imposed the grazed liability on the grantor. So that's kind of, the careful balancing act there. Then we have the special warranty deed here. So for the special warranty deed, what this does is it's the most common type of deed. The grantor gives to the grantee the deed. And what they basically say is they say, listen, I'm promising that as long as I've owned this property, I've done nothing to harm the property. I've done nothing to harm the title. We call that the special warranty deed. So here, the grantor says to the grantee, I promise during my ownership, I've done nothing to encumber this title. We can skip 3 and go to 4, the quitclaim deed. This is most commonly used and commonly asked about in regards to clearing clouds on title. So if they ask you, what deed might be used to clear a cloud on a title, it's called a quitclaim deed. So if there's a discrepancy, a cloud that needs to be cleared up, it's cleared up through a quitclaim deed. Under 3C here, respond to non-client inquiries. So non-clients are what we call customers. If customers ask us anything about the home, our obligation to them is not to tell them like the seller's bottom line number, not why the seller's selling, but more so the facts of the home. So our obligation to them is, to disclose the facts of the home to them. This part here, wouldn't worry about too much. And at the top here, of note, I would say is this here, Megan's Law. This E in general. So what do we talk about? Stigmatized and psychologically impacted properties. Here's the thing. Murders, suicides, natural deaths, haunted houses. You only have to disclose those to the purchasers if you're specifically asked about them. So again, you only have to disclose those to purchasers if you're specifically asked about them. A lot of people have questions about haunted houses all the time. So how do you prove a house is haunted? You don't. Here's the thing though. If the seller tells you we're selling because our house is haunted, the buyer asks you, is this house haunted? I'd have to say the seller says it's haunted. We can't prove it, but the seller says it's haunted. I know that sounds stupid, but murders, suicides, natural deaths, haunted houses, only have to disclose those things if you're asked about them specifically. Megan's Law has to do with registered sex offenders. So regarding that, we're not allowed to give information on that. So even if a buyer asks us, and we know the next door neighbor is a registered sex offender, we can't answer that. Let me share this real quick. Let me share myself. I'll show you how I deal with that. So if I have a client who has like 4 young kids, and I know the reason this house isn't selling, despite being priced well, is because the next door neighbor is a registered sex offender of the highest level. And in fact, when we show them the house, I see the guy staring out the window, and I'm weirded out by it. So here's the easiest way to let your clients know they should look into it. There's a registered sex offender. If your client says to you, "We're really interested in this house," um, anything that we should know. If you just simply say, "I recommend checking the registered sex offenders database before putting in an offer," you basically just told them there's a registered sex offender in the area, and that's totally legal. There's nothing wrong with that. What you can't do is you can't say, "That guy right there is a registered sex offender." You can't do that. It's basically doing the same thing, but you got to do it legally. And you might not even know this. So again, the database is kept by the local police department and online. So that, again, from an moral standpoint, I would have a tough time, selling a house to, a couple who has 4 young children, knowing there's a high level registered sex offender living next door staring at them. And then again, the easiest way to mitigate that is just tell them before you consider putting in an offer, check the sex offenders database, registered sex offenders database, and then let me know if you want to put in an offer. That tells them without telling them, basically. All right, so we're halfway through the review. I'm gonna eat dinner for 15 minutes. So we'll get back at 7:30. So let's just take about you take 20 minutes. It's 7:10 now. Take 20 minutes. We'll get back at 7:30, and then we will go over some more of this here. All right, so let's get back here. All right, so let's get into, let's see, contracts here. So contracts, page 14. Um, so right here, so there's 5 essential elements of a contract listed: offer and acceptance, consideration, competent parties, reality, consent, and legal purpose. Now, I'll specifically note here, it says nothing about the contract being in writing. The contract is not required to be in writing because verbal and oral agreements are valid, just not enforceable. So again, really 5 things that are essential here: offer and acceptance, consideration, competent parties, reality, consent, and legal purpose. So again, there is 5 essentials as far as contracts are concerned. So moving on from that, getting into the different types of contracts here, we have void contracts, we have voidable, we have unenforceable, things like that. The one to note here, I would say, is voidable. So a voidable contract, the best example of that is a lease that's between a landlord and a minor. So again, a voidable contract is a lease between a landlord and a minor. So that's one example, and that's really the only example you'll have to know for that. And unenforceable, when we talk about that, verbal and oral agreements are valid. They're just not enforceable due to what's called the statute of frauds. So if they ask you about, what's valid but not enforceable, verbal and oral agreements are valid but not enforceable due to the statute of frauds. Then we get into the assignment of contract here. So when you assign a contract, simply all you're doing is you're transferring all of the rights and obligations under the contract from one party to another. So again, you're simply transferring all of the rights and obligations under the contract from one party to another. Right, so let's go to the next page here. Hold on one second. All right. So next here, breach of contract. So a breach of contract is when somebody backs out of a deal without having any legal reasoning for doing so. Now, when somebody backs out of a deal without having any legal reasoning for doing so, there's 3 remedies that could occur. The first one here is rescission of contract. This here we say is revert to the status quo. The buyer and seller more or less pretend like they've never met before, and they revert to the status quo. Nobody gets anything. The second remedy is the supercompensatory damages. So basically this here is to sue for any financial losses that may have been incurred in the transaction. So when you sue for compensatory damages, you're suing for any financial losses that may have been incurred in the transaction. And then the third remedy is to seek what we call specific performance. And that is to take the breaching party to court and through court order, seek to enforce the terms of the contract. So in other words, try to force the buyer to buy or try to force the seller to sell. So specific performance here. And we talked about these clauses here already. So different types of listings here. So at the bottom here. So when you talk about listings, you're talking about dealing with the seller. So an exclusive agency listing, the owner lists with one broker and one broker only. So the owner lists with one broker only, and any other agent can show and sell that property. But the unique thing is that the seller reserves the right to sell themselves and pay no commission. So it's basically a regular listing, except the seller reserves the right to sell themselves and pay no commission. And then the most common one here, the exclusive right to sell, the owner lists with one broker only. Any broker can show the property. Anybody can bring a buyer, and no matter who procures the buyer for the property, the listing agent gets paid their commission. So this type of listing here, we say, gives the listing brokerage the greatest protection because no matter who brings the buyer, they get paid. Then the open listing, the giveaway for this, it's the only type of listing where the owner can list with more than one broker. So number one, it is the only type of listing where the owner may list with more than one broker. So that's number one. And number two, the owner reserves the right to sell themselves, not pay commission. So not only could the owner list with 1,000, brokers, they could also sell themselves and pay no commission. So what we say here is that this provides the listing brokerage with the least protection in that circumstance. All right, this next phrase here, time is of the essence. So as far as time is of the essence is concerned, that is a phrase put in a contract that says the date set forth in the agreement must be done on or before those dates. So the phrase time is of the essence, what it states is that the date set forth in the agreement must be done on or before those dates. So that is the phrase time is of the essence. In other words, it requires what we call punctual performance. Then a counteroffer. So as far as a counteroffer is concerned, counteroffers, they cancel all previous offers made. So if they were to ask you, like, what would cancel all previous offers made? It's a counteroffer. So again, a counteroffer would cancel all previous offers made. So that's number one. Number two, it's the most common scenario where the seller becomes the offeror. So again, number two, it's the most common scenario where the seller becomes the offeror. Let's see, moving down here, the option contract. So in an option contract, this here is the best example of a unilateral contract. Unilateral means binding only on one party. So when you have an option contract, the optionor, remember, or gives the base of word, so the optionor is a prospective seller. The optionor gives the optionee the right to buy or not buy a specific property for a stated sum within a limited period of time. So again, an option contract is unilateral, and unilateral means binding only on one party. So that's the best example of a unilateral contract there. This title insurance. So a couple unique things here about title insurance. Regarding title insurance, number one, it covers the past. So title insurance covers all matters of record and also those not of record prior to the owner's acquisition of title. So if they ask you, like, what would cover what would cover matters of record and not of record prior to the owner's acquisition of title? That's title insurance, number one. And number two, it's a one-time premium payment. So again, number two, title insurance would be a one-time premium payment. And then we have this abstract of title. So the abstract of title, we say, is either a condensed history or a brief digest of title. So again, the abstract of title, we say, is either a condensed history or a brief digest of title. It's basically a summary of everything that you would find in the title, essentially. So the abstract of title is a condensed history or a brief digest of title. The chain of title is a succession of owners. Who has owned it over the years? John sold to Joe, Joe sold to Mike, Mike sold to Nick, Nick sold to Frank, so on and so forth, right? So with this here, the chain of title, if there was a break in the chain of title, went from like Joe to Mike, Mike to Nick, and all of a sudden Anthony to Kyle, they'd say, well, how the hell did Anthony get this, right? There's a break in the chain of title. So how would you clear up a break in the chain of title? You would do that through what we call a quitclaim deed. And you would do that through what we call a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed is used to settle a cloud on title, because that would create that cloud on title, which is mentioned here. Now, things to do with wills. So regarding wills in general, when does a will take effect? A will would take effect upon death. So number one, first and foremost, a will would take effect upon death. So if they ask you when does a will take effect, a will takes effect upon death. That's number one. Number two, when you die testate, you die with a will. You die intestate, you die without a will. The person who makes the will is called the testator. Now, granted, the attorney is probably going to make it for you, but they're making it on your behalf. So the testator is the party who makes the will. If they just add IX at the end of any of these, it's just female. So IX is just female. So in this case, the female, who makes the will. Another term here it mentions administrator. An administrator only comes into play when somebody dies without a will. So if you die without a will, the court then appoints an administrator, and their job is to distribute the estate as they see fit. Then we have this term escheat. We talked about this already. Again, if you die without a will and without heirs, your property goes to the government, and that's called escheat. And then a holographic will. It's completely handwritten. It's unwitnessed and valid in New Jersey. So again, holographic wills, it is completely handwritten, unwitnessed, and it's valid in New Jersey. All right, so moving on to here, deeds. So as far as deeds are concerned, what do deeds do? Deeds transfer ownership. So as far as deeds are concerned, deeds transfer ownership. So if they were to ask you, like, which of the following would transfer ownership of property, that would be a deed. These different types of deeds we talked about already here. But here, under C, the essential elements of a deed. Written instrument shouldn't be here because it's not required to be in writing. But getting into the differences between the grantor and the grantee in a deed, the grantor is the party who gives a deed, basically the seller. The grantee is the party who receives a deed, basically the buyer. So the grantor, the party who gives a deed, and the grantee, the party who receives a deed. If the deed's in writing, which in real life it will be, if the deed's in writing, the grantor would be the only party who signs the deed. The grantee does not sign the deed. The grantor is the only party who signs the deed. The grantee just must be named. They simply just have to be named. That's all. And you might be saying, well, how do we know the grantee accepted it? Well, you have to have this thing called voluntary delivery and acceptance, which means that most likely the grantee accepted it and recorded it. And when they record it on the public record, that's pretty good evidence that they've accepted this. And also, between the grantor and grantee, only the grantor has to be a competent party. What that means is 18 years of age of sound mind and memory. And the grantee, they do not have to be a competent party. A grantee could be a toddler. God forbid a couple got into a car accident and died and they had a 2-year-old. They could leave everything they own to the 2-year-old, as an example. Next here, let's see. Is foreclosure, nothing we really have to know about that. Just if you stop paying your loan, they can foreclose on you. The realty transfer tax, that is a tax paid by the seller. So when you sell your home, you got to pay a realty transfer fee to the government. So being that you pay that to the government, it's viewed as a debit on your closing statement. A debit is an expense. If you're in the daytime class, we're going to be going over that on Thursday as an example. Capital gains tax. So what a capital gain is, just to define it to begin with, if you buy a house for $500 and you sell it for $300, you have a profit, a capital gain of $200,000. If you are a single filer, you're exempt up to gain $250,000 not to pay tax on it, if it's your principal residence. If you're a married filer, you file with your spouse, you're allowed to gain up to $500,000 and not to pay any tax on it. And again, in order to claim the capital gains tax exemption, the property must have served as your principal residence for at least 2 of the prior 5 years, and you couldn't have claimed this on another property in the prior 2-year span either, for that matter. All right, so practices of real estate here. Let's see, trust accounts. What's the whole purpose of a trust account? The whole purpose of a trust account is to avoid commingling. Commingling is the mixing of personal and business funds. The whole purpose of a trust account is to avoid commingling. Again, commingling is the mixing of personal and business, funds, and that's illegal. That's not allowed. Now, where would you have to have these trust accounts? The Real Estate Commission does regulate these, and they must be located in New Jersey at Real Estate Commission approved banks. So again, they must be located in New Jersey at Real Estate Commission approved banks. Let's see. They have to be deposited within 5 business days. We talked about that. All clients' money's got to be deposited within 5 business days. Civil Rights Act of 1866. The key thing that goes along with 1866 here would be race. So race right here. So if they ask you, like, what act would prevent discrimination specifically on the basis of race, it's the Civil Rights Act of 1866. That would prevent discrimination specifically on the basis of race. And it talks about exemptions here. So when would you legally be allowed to discriminate? You as a broker couldn't. So there's 3 criteria that first have to be met in order for somebody to legally discriminate. Number 1, they cannot advertise the intent of discriminating. Number 2, they can never discriminate on the basis of race. And number 3, they can't hire a real estate broker. If they've met those criteria, there's really 2 main examples where they would be allowed to discriminate. Number 1 would be an owner-occupied 2-family houses. So in owner-occupied 2-family houses, the owner can discriminate when choosing their other tenant on the basis of everything except for race. So that's number 1. And number 2, the other example would be in owner-occupied rooming and boarding houses. So if I own a rooming or boarding house, which means I live in, let's say it's a 5-bedroom house. I live in one of the bedrooms and I rent out the other 4 bedrooms to people, and we share all the common areas. I can legally discriminate when choosing my other tenants on the basis of everything except for race, as long as I don't advertise I intend discriminating, as long as I don't hire a real estate broker. And some of those examples are listed at the top here. All right, so next here, the HUD fair housing poster. So if they talk about fair housing posters in general, as far as fair housing posters are concerned, um, anytime they ask you about fair housing posters, anti-discrimination posters, the thing to know about these is that they must be located, prominently displayed in the broker's office. And if not, then every claim of discrimination is assumed true. So for these fair housing posters, again, they must be prominently displayed in brokers' offices. And if not, then every single claim of discrimination is going to be assumed to be true. Incorrect factual statements versus puffing. Puffing is an exaggerated claim that anybody looking at it knows an exaggeration. It's the greatest deal of the century. It's the best buy of all time. Things like that. That's puffing. So again, puffing is an exaggerated claim that any average observer looking at it would know is an exaggeration. Uninformed versus informed misrepresentation. So what's worse? Well, informed's worse because they equate that to fraud. When you knowingly lie about a fact in the home, that's informed misrepresentation. So that's bad. Uninformed misrepresentation is lying about a fact of the home in which you have no guilty knowledge of. So again, uninformed misrepresentation is lying about a fact in the home that you don't have any guilty knowledge of. Let's see, liability, responsibility of the agent. So the broker's responsible for all the agents in the office. So if they do something wrong, the broker can be on the hook as well. So the broker's responsible for all the actions of their licensees. Also, licensees are typically brought on as independent contractors. What does that mean and why is that important? The important part about that is being that you're an independent contractor, you're free and clear to set your own schedule, make your own hours, do what you want, essentially. So as an independent contractor, again, you are free and clear to make your own schedule, set your own hours, and, kind of do as you please. The important part for us to probably know about that is that your broker cannot require, mandatory attendance at anything to do with office meetings, office functions, office events, things like that. The procuring cause. So the procuring cause, we say, this is either a series or an unbroken chain of events that leads to the consummation of a transaction. So again, the procuring cause, we say, is either a series or an unbroken chain of events that leads to the consummation of a transaction. Let's see. Practicing within your area of competence. So here's a good rule of thumb for the test. If they ever say, tell your client, your client asks you a legal question, what advice should you give them? The answer is always tell them consult an attorney. Almost always on the test when the answer options consult an attorney, that is almost always going to be the answer. So again, practicing within your area of competence. When in doubt, tell the client to consult an attorney. B here, avoiding the unauthorized practice of law. So in regards to that, what do we have to know about that? Well, again, similar to what we just talked about here. When in doubt, tell the client to consult an attorney. The German Antitrust Act, what this prevents is any anti-competitive business practices. So if they ask you, what would prevent any anti-competitive business practices, that could really hinder competition, it's called the Sherman Antitrust Act. As far as these math numbers, this is the number to know. They might ask you how many square feet happen to be in an acre. It's 43,560. Just get 43,560 square feet in an acre. I just drank a bunch of water. Let me take 2 minutes real quick to run in the bathroom. All right, so let's get back here. So go here to equity. Your equity, all you do there, you just take the fair market value. Take the fair market value minus minus what you owe on the home. So the house is worth 500 grand, but you owe 400 grand. You have 100,000 in equity in that house as an example. CMA, comparative market analysis. So this is one of the few things that agents may offer for free. So agents can offer a free CMA, a free comparative market analysis, which they can also call market study, market analysis, free estimate of value, things like that. So again, the CMA, the comparative market analysis, again, simply put, that is the estimate of value. NOI, net operating income, you would use this with investment properties. You just take your gross income the property generates minus the operating expenses. So again, you just take the gross income minus the operating expenses. Property management, we talked a lot about this already. So again, they're general agents. Good example is that they're a general agent. They do a lot of different things. Let's see, number 4, this would be important. Does a property manager have to be licensed? The answer is really it depends. It comes down to what I like to call the salary test. It depends on how they're compensated. So if they're fully salaried and their pay is not going to change regardless of vacancy rates, they don't have to have a license. However, on the other end, if they are not fully salaried, if they are compensated variably based on like real estate related factors like renting out units, then they would have to have a license. So really what it comes down to is how are they compensated? Let's see, disclosures. Yeah, so disclosures. So if they're bidding out like a landscaping contract and they get a bid from their brother, they just have to let the owner know, hey, that's my brother. All right, so this eviction here, we talked about it earlier. Actual eviction is when the landlord seeks to move the tenant. It's a 3-step process. The first step is to serve them with what's called a notice to quit. The notice to quit is ask them nicely to leave. The second step is serve them with a judgment of possession, which is, getting them into court and saying, hey, we want to get you out of here. And the third step, last but not least, is to seek, a warrant for removal. Actually ask the court to issue a warrant and say, hey, issue this warrant and get this person out of here. So again, those would be the 3 steps there. Constructive eviction is when the landlord left the property in such a horrible shape that the tenant just wants out. They want to break their lease early. And we call that constructive eviction. Also a 3-step process. Number 1, you got to notify the landlord of the issue. Number 2, you have to give them a reasonable period of time to fix the issue. Now, reasonable period of time is very subjective. That's really up to the courts. And number 3, if the landlord doesn't fix the issue in a reasonable period of time, the tenant would have to vacate while the problem currently exists. So those would be the 3, steps involved in that. Now, the other option instead of number 3, if you really like where you live, you can seek what's called repair and deduct. In other words, you can pay somebody to come out and repair it and then deduct it from your rent. Next here, security deposit. So they're mainly going to ask about residential. So if residential security, typically they're going to ask you, what is the maximum that could be charged for a residential security deposit? And the answer is a month and a half rent. So again, for residential security, the maximum they could charge you is a month and a half rent. Again, for residential security, the max they could charge you is a month and a half rent. And that security is the property of the tenant. So any interest gained, then it's supposed to be paid out to them. These child protection window guards here. So if you have a tenant with a child age 10 or younger, upon written request from them, they would have to provide, maintain, and install these child protection window guards. There's 2 exceptions. You don't have to have them on first floor, units and windows that lead to fire escapes because that would be a fire hazard. Speaking of fire hazards, carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. So these here must be located on every single level of the home and outside each sleeping area. So again, carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. These here must be located on every single level of the home and outside each sleeping area. Then we have the non-conforming use. So as far as the non-conforming use is concerned, this is a use of property that was lawfully established prior to the enactment of a new zoning ordinance. So in other words, I built a soda factory where it was zoned for it. Then the town came in and rezoned it, and the town said, you can't have soda factories here anymore, only single family use, but you're grandfathered in as a pre-existing non-conforming use. So get a non-conforming use, they're grandfathered in, and they're allowed to stay there as long as they stay as the same use. Unfortunately, if you burn down, you got to rebuild something that you'd have to rebuild something, that either conforms with the current zoning or apply for a variance to seek permission to, rebuild that prior use because that use no longer conforms with zoning. Regulations here, the Real Estate Sales Full Disclosure Act. So the Real Estate Sales Full Disclosure Act, simply put, what this does, this regulates the sales and marketing of out-of-state properties in New Jersey. So again, the Real Estate Sales Full Disclosure Act, what that does, it would regulate the sales and marketing of out-of-state properties in New Jersey. It only applies for bulk offerings like 100 lots or more. It wouldn't apply to, other offerings. So really just bulk offerings, which they would deem to be 100 lots or more. And if you violate something under this act here, you could be fined a lot of money, up to $50,000, and they give you 7 days to back out and things like that. So that's the Real Estate Sales Full Disclosure Act there. Next here, talk about the EIS, the Real Estate Commission. So on the Real Estate Commission, how many members are there? There's 8 members broken into 5-1. 5 are both brokers and state residents for the past 10 years. 2 are members of the public, and 1's a governmental designate. So again, there's 8 members on the Real Estate Commission broken into 5-1. 5 both brokers and state residents for the past 10 years. 2 members of the public, and 1 a governmental designate. Let's see. Also, for the Real Estate Commission, they might ask you, who writes real estate laws? And it's not the Real Estate Commission, it's the state legislature. The state legislature, we say, promulgates. They're the ones who signs off on real estate laws. Also, they may ask you, who does the Real Estate Commission operate underneath and who are they funded by? They operate under and they're funded by the Department of Banking and Insurance. So again, the Real Estate Commission, they operate underneath and they're funded by the Department of Banking and Insurance. Then we have the fines here. So as far as the fines are concerned, for a first offense, you can be fined up to $5,000. For a second, up to 10. For a third, up to 10. For no more than 25,000 total. It's kind of like the 3 strikes, you're out. After you commit 3 violations, you're done. You're not gonna. I mean, your license is taken away for the entire remaining term. But even when you reapply, you're not getting it back. And then difference here between suspension versus revocation. So suspension is for a portion of the remaining term, and your license term is July 1st odd numbered year to July 1st odd numbered year. So suspension is for a portion of the remaining term, and revocation for the entire remaining term. Let's see, activities that require licensure over here. Basically, to keep it simple for you, anytime that you're dealing with a buyer or seller in a real estate transaction, you got to have a real estate license. So if you represent somebody in buying, selling, or renting real estate, you got to have a real estate license. Some of the exemptions: New Jersey attorneys, they can transfer property on behalf of a client, not like listed like an agent, but they can transfer from one family member to another. Owners, an owner can sell for sale by owner, obviously. Those are some examples. As a salesperson, the qualifications are listed here. But the main thing to know for a salesperson, the only person that they can accept commission from is just their employing broker only. So as a salesperson, the only person you could accept commission from is just your employing broker only. As a broker, if you call yourself a broker, that means you're the broker of record for a licensed real estate firm. So, and as a broker, what does that mean? It means you're the broker of record for a licensed real estate firm. Also for the broker, you can only be the broker of record for one office and one office only. Like, you could own 10 offices, but you can only be the broker of record at one of them. Broker salesperson, somebody who's met all the requirements to be a broker. They've even gone as far as going back to real estate school, taking the brokerage school exam, state exam, things like that. They're still operating in a salesperson's capacity. We call them a broker salesperson. And then a referral agent, don't worry about that. They took that out. All right, so statutes and rules governing licensee activities here. So the first one, reference to ads in the broker's office. So every ad you place has to have one thing every single time. It's the name of the brokerage firm. So every ad that you have must have the name of the brokerage firm. That talks about that here. It talks about blind ads. So if you have an ad that does not list the name of the brokerage firm, we call that a blind ad. And blind ads are illegal. So again, if you have an ad that does not, have the name of the brokerage firm, we call that a blind ad, and blind ads are illegal. They're not allowed. And then web pages, as far as a web page is concerned, it's all viewed as a type of advertising. So your personal website would have to have all your broker's contact info on there. And with web pages, phone numbers while we're on this here. In regards to this, with the web page, with the phone number, anything you put about yourself, you also have to have about the brokerage firm. So I put my phone number, gotta have the brokerage's phone number. I have my personal website, either has to list the brokerage's website or give an electronic link to it, through my website when they visit it. And any information about myself cannot be in more prominent print than the information of the brokerage firm. Franchises. If you work for a franchise company, you just have to disclose each office independently owned and operated. The multiple listing service, in other words, the MLS. So again, the multiple listing service, in other words, the MLS. Just remember, it's a website. It's not a type of listing. People confuse it with the open listing all the time. The open listing, you can list with multiple brokers, but the MLS, the multiple listing service, is simply a website. Free discounted services or products. Do you have any free offerings contingent upon the client signing a contract with you? The answer is no. You cannot have any free offerings contingent upon the client signing a contract with you. Sold or under contract here. So simply put, sold means sold. So sold means closing has taken place and the deed's been transferred. Under contract, what does that mean? What's under contract mean? So under contract is the period of time after attorney review, but prior to closing. So again, under contract best describes the period of time after attorney review, but prior to closing. And what it basically means that one or more items still has to occur before the deed's transferred. Commission rates. So regarding commission rates, if you advertise your commission rate, you just have to disclose this. In New Jersey, commission is negotiable. Nobody really advertises commission rates, but if you were to, you'd have to note that in New Jersey, commission is negotiable. Rebates. Rebates may only be offered by brokers and just the buyers. How does a rebate work? If we offer a buyer a $2,000 rebate and they're buying the house for $500 grand and our commission is 3%, that would mean that our commission would have been $15,000. But now what's going to happen is our commission is going to be $13,000, and we're going to credit the other $2,000 towards the purchase price, which means the buyer is going to get it for $498 instead of $500. So rebates can only be paid by the broker and just to the buyer and to the buyer only. Can't pay it to a seller, to a renter, just to a buyer and buyer only. About this. So with the brokerage, it's got to be a physical location, which is open to the public normal business hours, which is 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So a brokerage, it's got to be a physical location, which is open to the public normal business hours, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. All right, let's go to the next page here. So let's see. Record keeping. So as far as record keeping is concerned, certain records are kept for 6 years, others for 6 months. So for 6 years, I have it here. So for 6 years, it's completed transactions, how client's money was handled. And for 6 months, it's unaccepted offers and expired listings. So again, 6 years, completed transactions, how client's money was handled. And then 6 months, unaccepted offers and expired listings. Talked about rebates already. Skipping down to the Mount Laurel requirement. So if they ask you about Mount Laurel, they might say, what created the Council of Affordable Housing? And it's the Mount Laurel decision. So again, the Mount Laurel decision, that created the Council of Affordable Housing, in other words, COA. So again, if they ask you, what created, the Council of Affordable Housing, it's the Mount Laurel decision. The Mount Laurel decision created that. Let's see. This here, number 3, the guarantee fund. So as far as the guarantee fund is concerned, this is a fund that's in place to compensate consumers who are financially harmed due to the guilty actions of a licensee. So if like a licensee steals deposit money from you, you can seek to collect out of the guarantee fund. The max payment out of the guarantee fund, that could be paid out for a claim is $20,000. Again, the max payment out of the guarantee fund is $20,000, and also for the guarantee fund, if there ever is payment out of it, the guilty licensee's license is automatically revoked. Why? It means they held a hearing, they heard both sides of the story, and they said, listen, you are clearly in trouble for stealing money, and we're going to have to pay money out of the guarantee fund. So besides that, money's money. We don't want people like you in the business. We're revoking your license, and you can't even reapply for up to like 5 years. So you're not getting your license back. So again, with this guarantee fund, again, it's in place to compensate consumers who are financially harmed due to the guilty actions of a licensee. And again, the max payment out of the guarantee fund is $20,000 for a violation. Timeshares, I don't think we'll ask about those, but if you are selling timeshares in New Jersey for New Jersey properties, you are supposed to have a real estate license. Now I'm going to write my email here. You guys email me now for this, kylekovats@gmail.com. Email me right now and just make the subject line state exam outline, school and state exam outline, and I'll send this over to you guys. I'm going to hang out in this office probably for the next 20-30 minutes or so. So just email me now, if you want a copy of this. If you don't want a copy of it, don't email me. But if you want a copy of this, you can email me. That's my email right there, Kyle Kovats. And does anybody have any questions, on anything? Obviously, this is a ton of stuff. And I know we go through this at a breakneck pace. We go through this at a super quick pace because, really what I'm trying to do is, summarize, 75 hours worth of class. Let's see. Yeah, codes do change for the smoke detectors. If it's new construction, it's got to be like hardwired and stuff like that. Just write in the subject line of the email. Just write exam outline. Exam outline. That's fine. All right, guys. So I'm gonna look out for that email. And somebody says, how do you get first-time home buyers to put down no money on an FHA loan? All right. So the way you would do it is, let's say your buyer's buying. They want to bid 400 grand on a house. And they're going to go minimum down payment on an FHA loan, 3.5%. 3.5% would be around roughly around $14,000. What you would do is you'd write the offer for 414 with a seller's concession of 14,000. What this will do is at closing, your buyer's going to buy the house. It's going to look like they're buying the house for 414. That's what's going to go down on the what's going to get recorded. But what actually happens is at closing, yeah, you pay 414, but from the lender's loan proceeds, the seller hands 14,000 right back to you at closing, and you use that towards closing costs. So it's hard to explain without it's hard to really explain without doing it. So it's called you would do it through what's called a seller's concession. Who holds the earnest money deposit? Broker or the attorney? Both. I would recommend having the attorney hold it, but either one of them can hold it. My email is written on the screen. You should be able to see that. It's just kylekovats@gmail.com. Thank you, Jorge. Appreciate it. Are rebates common? No, rebates are very uncommon. I've personally never seen them on a deal. What grade do you need to pass the school test? 70%. 70% of both the school and state exam. Should we focus on what you covered today to study for the exam? Yeah, I would focus on this outline. I would also do the practice questions in particular. And I'm going to write this here right now. I'm about to write on here, and you'll be able to see this. I'm about to write on here. Let me put this in larger writing. But I'm about to write on here the most important chapters for test purposes. Let's get this here. 3 to 5. 9 to 12, 14, 18, 20, and 22. Those are the most important chapters for test purposes. I would say those chapters right there make up somewhere in the vicinity of probably 85 to 90% of the school end state exam. Yeah, if you guys want this outline, just email me. My email's on the screen right now. Just my name, Kyle Kovats at Gmail. Yeah, when you guys are finished up with your class, you can take the school exam anytime you want. Just, email me, let me know you're done with the class and you're ready to take the school exam. I'll send you the link along with the passcode. Thanks, Catherine. Appreciate it. Yeah, Matt, email me on Thursday and I'll shoot that over to you. Do we have any other practice tests besides the ones in the book? No. There's about 1,600 practice questions in there. If you actually go to the back of the book, there's a bunch of other practice questions in there too. So, you have a practice quiz for every chapter, but at the end of the book, there's 7 review quizzes. There's review quiz 1 through 5, and then there's a broker's practice and a salesperson's practice. I would still do both of those. They both provide value, I think. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate that. I'll definitely take you up on that one. See, Frank's bringing me the homemade sauce. This is why we do this. You're welcome, Yarda. Appreciate you attending. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Kareem. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I saw Gronk to Tampa. That's pretty crazy. Somebody shot me a text while I was I haven't been on my phone all day. So somebody shot me a text while I was teaching this Gronk going to Tampa. That's crazy. How much time are you just studying for the state exam? I would say whenever you feel ready. I mean, that's going to be on a person by person basis. But again, if you practice these chapters I wrote down here, you do the practice test, you review this, I think you'll be in good shape ultimately. No update from PSI again. Still remains May 4th. They're going to be giving the update. PSI is a state testing center, so they're going to be giving an update on May 4th. I emailed the guy to follow up today because he said May 1st. I looked at my email again. He said May 1st. So, but I think he meant to say May 4th because May 1st is a Friday. I think all Shane, all of them Shane. Thank you, Marlene. Yeah, thank you guys. Honestly, I think in person the review's better. It's tough to do. Like teaching the class online, I think is good. I think it's actually better. I think it actually provides a better experience teaching the class online. But I think the review's better in person. So not that I'm upset with how I was able to present this tonight, but I think it'd be better for you guys if again, unfortunately, we can't do this in person. So this is just the best that I can do. But I think it would have been a lot better if we did this in person. Will class remain online when you reopen? Well, I could tell you this. I'm getting the feeling that from talking with people within the real estate commission that we're going to have to be online through the summer. They're in Trenton, so they work very closely with the governor. It sounds like the governor's leaning towards shutting down schools for the rest of the year. If he hasn't already, maybe he has already. But it sounds like they're leaning towards no schools, no in-person schools until September. So it looks like we'll be online through the summer. It actually looks like. Thanks, Maria. I appreciate that. Thank you, Laura. When can we take the school exam? Whenever you're done with class. So whenever you're done with class, just shoot me an email. Let me know you're done with class. I'll confirm that by checking your attendance. And then once you're done with class, once you finished up your classes, you can take the school exam at that point. Yeah, somebody says, I hope they'll have the state test online. I'll be honest with you, I don't think they are going to. The reason I don't think they're going to is I always say follow the money. And what I mean by follow the money is it's going to be a lot easier to pass if you do it online because you can basically do it open book. They can tell you don't look at your book, but they know people are going to look at their book. The New Jersey test is super hard, and they make a lot of money off people not passing on the first try. So I think they're gonna, have it back in person. I think they're gonna have it back in person as soon as May. So we'll see. As soon as we get the update on that, I'll let you know. Is there a difference between the school and state tests? Yeah, it's all different questions. I would say degree of difficulty and the way the questions are asked are the same, but the questions themselves, those are different. We've had students tell us the school exam's harder. We've had people tell us the state exam's harder. So that leads me to believe it's, somewhere, in between. Unfortunately, the state won't let us. I think the state should allow instructors to take the state exam once a year so we can get a feel for, what's on it. So I just have to rely on students, kind of telling me what's on it. That's one thing I'm going to send to you guys too. The state test is 110 questions. Yeah. So you guys, again, just email me, KyleKovats@gmail, and then I'll send you over the outline. All right, guys. So I'm going to close this up now. Thank you guys for attending. I hope you guys got value out of this. Again, I think it would have been better if it was in person, but I hope you guys, got some value out of this. So we'll see some of you tomorrow. We'll see some of you in the near future. All right. Thank you, guys.